for our affection and our celebration of Rod Serling to be commemorated tomorrow in Recreation Park. Ohio makes a great claim on Rod Serling, and we intend to join the celebrating. And although I grew up in New York, and so also claim Rod as a favorite son of this state, I have been living and working in Ohio since 1983. You figure out the years. So this presentation is from the Buckeye State, the state which likes to say it is the heart of it all. And when it comes to Rod Serling, we have plenty of heart. Reeling from the horrors of World War II, Rod Serling decided to head for Ohio in 1946, unsure of what he wanted to do with his life. He was searching for a sense of direction and purpose. He was looking for a place where there was at least a chance of coping with his hellish battle experiences as a paratrooper in the South Pacific. To his great fortune, and to ours, he found all of this and quite a bit more in Ohio, the Buckeye State. Indeed, the path that eventually would lead him to the land of shadow and substance, the Twilight Zone, truly began on the campus of Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And this is where we start with the first image. Rod Serling proudly wearing his Antioch College sweatshirt during a late 1940 stay at the family cottage on Cayuga Lake in upstate New York. It is no understatement to say that without Ohio, Rod Serling may have never found his way to the fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It was there that he discovered writing. It was there, to be sure, that Rod Serling realized he was a writer. And it was there that he learned his craft, served the apprenticeship, and honed the skills that would win him 6 Emmy Awards and enduring fame. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the reason that we in Ohio consider Ohio holy ground. It is because Rod Serling actually became a writer in Ohio. The Ohio connections run deep and are rightfully being celebrated with 3 notable Serling-centric dates on the horizon. October 2nd, marking the 65th anniversary of the Twilight Zone premiere on CBS. December 25th, marking the 100th anniversary of Rod Serling's birth. And June 28th, 2025, will be the 50th anniversary of Rod's death at the age of 50. And Ohio is going all out in its effort to embrace the Serling connection. Notable among the planned honors will be the unveiling of an Ohio historical marker at Antioch College in 2025. You are the first to hear the news, because this was just approved by the state a couple of weeks ago. The 2-sided marker will tell visitors about Rod Serling at Antioch College on one side and Rod Serling, television pioneer, on the other. It also will commemorate Serling's addition to the Ohio Anna Library Association's Ohio Literary Trail, which charts the state's rich literary traditions. I cannot show you what a mock-up of the marker will look like. I do know what the words are going to be on the marker, but I can show you what it will sort of look like by showing you the marker for, if this will move, it's not moving. Come on, you shut up. Nick, I'm gonna kill you, Nick. Well, I would show you if this thing moved. Let's try this. Let me try something else. No, this thing is frozen. Well, I have some great images to show you. And I hate to fall back on just describing it. So all our tech people have left the building at this point, right?
Press enter or space bar, see if that does anything.
Yeah. Anybody under 40? 30? No, this is not moving, folks. Well, if somebody could go run get Nick for me, we'll see if we can do this, and I will soldier on in between. That hits escape. Now let's see what happens if we do this. We'll do it this way. Okay. This is the image I wanted to show you anyway. This is the marker for Toni Morrison, the Nobel Prize-winning writer from Lorain, Ohio. And this is what Rod Serling's marker will look like at Antioch College. This will put Rod Serling in the company of such Ohio literary heavyweights as not only Toni Morrison, but Hart Crane and James Thurber. So this is like saying, Rod is not just a great writer from Ohio, Rod is not just a great fantasy writer, Rod is not just a great television writer, Rod is a great writer, period. This is what Ohioana board member Betty Weeble, author of the Ohio Literary Trail, a guide, had to say about this. When Ohioana announced the new Ohio Literary Trail in 2020, we hadn't considered that the trail would continue to expand. Then in 2022, we added a new Toni Morrison historical marker in Lorain County to our trail stops. Ohioana was proud to help fund that marker and contribute to its promotion. Now, we are proud to spearhead the addition of a new Rod Serling historical marker on the campus of Antioch College. Ohio is planning a year of events, folks. Film festivals, book talks, and all leading up to the unveiling of this marker, which we hope will be October 2nd, 2025, on the anniversary of the premiere of The Twilight Zone. That date is not set in stone, but if we can confirm it, you are all invited to Ohio. You are all invited to the campus of Antioch College a little more than a year from now to celebrate a marker which will look like that, but will say Rod Serling. Starting in January of this year, the Ohioana Quarterly published the first of 4 stories about Rod Serling in consecutive issues. And Echoes, the magazine of the Ohio State Historical Society, will be devoting a cover story about Rod and Ohio in its next issue. So, who was the Rod Serling who showed up at Antioch 78 years ago? By his own admission, Serling returned from World War II both an angry young man and something of a lost soul. The relatively happy and secure existence he had known growing up here in Binghamton, New York, had been brutally shattered by the horrors of war. Binghamton, his hometown, would forever be viewed in a nostalgic haze. There was always a yearning in him to go back to those pre-war summer evenings of hot dogs, cotton candy, band concerts, and carousel rides in his beloved recreation park. That Binghamton, that world, was lost to him except in memory. As most of you know, upon graduation from Binghamton Central High School in 1943, he enlisted in the U.S. Army, joining the 11th Airborne Division's 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment, even though at 5'4" he weighed only 118 pounds. How he talked himself in, I will never know. But the war left him damaged physically and psychologically. The physical trauma was thanks to an exploding mortar shell that sent shrapnel into Serling's knee and wrist, and he was awarded the Purple Heart for his injuries and the Bronze Star for bravery. The knee would continue to give him problems, sometimes spontaneously bleeding, sometimes causing him to fall. But then there were the wounds you couldn't see, the horrors that weighed so heavily on his psyche and fueled his nightmares. Serling would tell an adult writing class at Antioch College in the 1960s, shrapnel wounds and mangled bullet-ridden bodies are not the only casualties of war. There are casualties of the mind, and every war produces a backwash, a residue of pain and grief. He decided to give Antioch a try because his older brother, Robert, had gone there, class of 1942. He enrolled on the GI Bill, planning to be a physical education major. The coping process is what turned him into a writer. Quote, I was bitter about everything and at loose ends when I got out of the service. I think I turned to writing to get it off my chest. He was in the ideal environment for this cathartic revelation. Anne Serling, his daughter, and a writer in her own right, said the seeds of his strongly felt convictions, understanding of human nature, and ability to see beyond the obvious were nourished at Antioch and would become the trademarks of his work. I have to do this my own way. This picture is of Rod at far right, as you can see, at a seminar type of class at the home of his Antioch English professor, Albert Little. And this is important because it was about this time he switched his major to language and literature. A student literary magazine gave him an outlet to publish his prose, and his first short story in the Antiochian appeared in the March 1948 edition. During that first year at Antioch, he met, well, you know who he met. And these, by the way, the last picture and this one are both from the archives at Antioch College. So, he meets Columbus native Carolyn Louise Carroll Kramer, a 17-year-old education major. They are married on July 31st, 1948 in Columbus. And this is pictures of Rod and Carol Serling at the Antioch College campus radio station, WABS. And this is what Antioch College archivist Scott Sanders had to say. Among its many distinguished alumni, Rod Serling was probably Antioch College's most famous graduate. As he put it in a 1962 interview, he came to the campus in 1946 as a somewhat pathological 22-year-old, quite unsure of himself, and was part of a host of other World War II veterans enrolled on the GI Bill. To him, Antioch was, quote, a very special place, which made the assumption of maturity on my part. But, Sanders said, Antioch provided freedom and just enough structure that allowed him to explore his interests. Serling's true apprenticeship as a writer began when he was named manager of the student-operated campus radio station. He was writing and directing a new show every week, often acting in the productions, which is pretty incredible right there. And then those productions were broadcast on Springfield stations WJEM-FM and WJEL-AM. He also managed to sell scripts to national radio anthology shows while at Yellow Springs. Now, after graduation in 1950, he moved 70 miles south to Cincinnati. I don't like stopping, but I have to. They're making me do this, folks. Okay, so he moves to Cincinnati. I'm just going to leave it there for right now. Call it back when I need it. And he found his first work as a staff writer at AM radio station WLW. John Kieswetter, the TV media reporter for Cincinnati Public Radio's WVXU-FM and the former Cincinnati Enquirer TV columnist and a leading expert on Rod Serling in Cincinnati, had this to say. Rod Serling's first professional writing job for WLW radio and television for $75 a week lit his creative fire for all the wrong reasons. Serling was frustrated writing patter for TV variety shows, regional travel series, and even a sitcom called Leave It to Kathy. Serling wanted to write serious drama and finally found his outlet at a competing station, WKRC-TV. While still employed at WLW, Serling started contributing scripts to The Storm, a new anthology show on WKRC. He sold 32 scripts to this half-hour live drama series that premiered in 1951. And some of these scripts were later reworked into scripts for national network shows, including something called The Time Element, a fantasy drama broadcast on the Desilu Playhouse in 1958 as a sort of dry run for the landmark anthology series he would launch the following year, The Twilight Zone. What Cincinnati viewers didn't know at the time, of course, was that they were witnessing the works in progress of a TV genius, Kieswetter said. Serling found his groove in Cincinnati, tapping into a passion that set him on a course to create The Twilight Zone by the end of the decade. The fulfillment he found in The Storm prompted him to quit WLW after 2 years in 1952 and freelance scripts from Cincinnati for Kraft Television Theater, the Hallmark Hall of Fame, the Lux Video Theater, and other New York-based live dramas. Now completely focusing on his career as a freelance writer, Serling commuted between New York and Ohio as he sold script after script to network television shows. Accepting the need to be closer to New York, the Serlings moved to Westport, Connecticut in 1954. Now, Rod Serling, who only lived to be 50, spent 8 of his adult years in Ohio. For a man who only lived to be 50, that is not an inconsiderable amount of time. And by the time he left Cincinnati, he was well on his way to establishing himself as one of the most promising young writers contributing scripts to the infant medium's golden age of live dramas. That promise was fulfilled with the acclaim for Patterns, his 1955 play about a young executive from Ohio hired by the hard-hearted president of a major Manhattan operation. It won him the first of his 6 Emmys. Others followed for Requiem for a Heavyweight, his 1956 story about an aging boxer, and The Comedian, his 1957 adaptation of the novella by Ernest Lehman. By the late 1960s, however, Serling had grown frustrated with increasingly intrusive network censors demanding changes in his socially conscious dramas. His answer, The Twilight Zone. The 34-year-old Serling took a gamble, betting that under the guise of fantasy, he could address the exact same issues and themes that were making those network censors nervous. Prejudice, racism, greed, scapegoating, how we treat children and the elderly, authoritarian dangers, and the human race's penchant for war. The gamble paid off, garnering Serling 2 more Emmys for writing. Now, Rod Serling told us that the fifth dimension, known as the Twilight Zone, was as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. That it was the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. That it was a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. Well, that takes in a whole lot of territory, folks. And some of it inevitably has to hit Ohio. The state embraces that connection too. Rod Serling, in the addition to the time that Rod Serling spent in Ohio as a student at Antioch and as a fledgling writer in Cincinnati, the state's notable Twilight Zone connections include the following. When Serling joined Cincinnati AM radio station WLW in 1950, he replaced a young writer from Virginia named Earl Hamner Jr. Hamner, best known as the creator-narrator of The Waltons, would pen 8 episodes of The Twilight Zone, including The Hunt, Jezebel, and Ring-a-Ding-Dong. A memorable first season Twilight Zone episode written by Serling, A Stop at Willoughby, is about a tired businessman's attempt to reach a town that doesn't seem to exist. Serling, of course, knew there was a Willoughby, Ohio. It does exist. He never confirmed that this is where he got the name, but he drove past the town every year, every summer, when heading from Ohio to the Cayuga Lake Cottage. The real town of Willoughby, located just to the east of Cleveland, has embraced this connection. Each year they hold an annual Last Stop Willoughby Street Festival every August, and so you're invited to Ohio for that too. Among the memorable episodes of The Twilight Zone actually set in Ohio are actually set in fictional towns. One of them, It's a Good Life. This episode starring Bill Mooney as a little boy with powers that hold everyone around him in a grip of fear. That was one episode set in Ohio. This is another. Nick of Time, starring William Shatner as our superstitious newlywed. Among the other Ohio connections to the Twilight Zone that we proudly boast is this fellow. Cleveland native Burgess Meredith. Yes, one of the actors most associated with the Twilight Zone was from Ohio. He starred in 4 episodes of the Twilight Zone, 3 of them written by Rod Serling. Time Enough at Last, Mr. Dingle the Strong, and The Obsolete Man. The 4th episode, Printer's Devil, was written by Charles Beaumont. But Meredith also appeared in a 1965 episode of Serling's Western series, The Loner, 2 episodes of the horror anthology series Night Gallery, and he was the narrator for the 1983 Twilight Zone movie. Among the other notable Ohio actors on the Twilight Zone were Cleveland native Jack Weston in The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street and The Bar, Youngstown native Joe Flynn in Escape Clause, Dayton's Jonathan Winters in A Game of Pool, Columbus Grove native Dean Jagger in Static, former Akronite and Clevelander Jesse White in Once Upon a Time and Cavender is Coming, Cincinnati native Dan Tobin in A Penny for Your Thoughts, and Defiance native Catherine Squire in One More Pallbearer and In His Image. We didn't do too bad in contributing to the Twilight Zone. By the time The Twilight Zone was on the air, Serling, his wife, and their 2 daughters, Jody and Ann, would spend their summers at the family cottage on Cayuga Lake in upstate New York, north of Ithaca. Ever feeling the sentimental pull of Binghamton, he always would take a day to drive over to his hometown and walk the streets of his youth. He also returned to Antioch, accepting a teaching position in 1962 after the 3rd season of The Twilight Zone. "I just want them to remember me 100 years from now," goes the famous quote from Rod Serling's last interview. Approaching the 100th anniversary of his birth, we remember. We remember the writer, and we recognize the importance of the writing. Binghamton recognizes Serling during this centennial year with tomorrow's unveiling of a 6-foot statue in Recreation Park. Ohio will follow with the historical marker at Antioch. Ohio Anna Library Association Executive Director Kimberly L. Keel said, "Ohio shaped the work done by Rod Serling across his lifetime. It is the place where he found and developed his writer's voice. His weekly radio plays for WJEL in Springfield, his dramas written for WHIO, and his years at Antioch all contribute to him becoming the writer he was and to creating shows and films that have stood the test of time. Indeed, they have. So yes, we remember. We honor, and all of us together, we celebrate." Thank you. No time for questions.
All right, we have a special surprise before we start our next presentation. I want to welcome a very special guest. Senator Leah Webb is here to make an announcement.
One of our own hometown heroes, Rod Serling, who's all here to celebrate. Yes, SerlingFest. So I am New York State Senator Leah Webb.